Please welcome home writer, producer, director Scott Cooper.
Oh my God, I'm so touched. Thank you. Jeez. I mean, these screenings in Santa Barbara mean as much to me as any screening that I have. So thank you for coming. This is a home for me. I wrote my first film, Crazy Heart, while I lived in Montecito, and thank you. Well, my daughter was born at Cottage Hospital, so it feels like it feels like home. So thank you so much for coming out.
So there we go. When you were here for, I mean, you've been to practically all of your films. We've done a Q&A. When you were here in 2013 with Out of the Furnace, you actually, right where you are seated now, you told me that you were listening to Nebraska, and you also told me that your dad had introduced you to Bruce Springsteen, and that your dad had introduced you to Nebraska. So now it's like full circle.
Yeah. You know, my father really kind of introduced me to most, as parents do, to my early musical tastes, jazz, bluegrass, classic country. And then he introduced me to Bruce, but through Nebraska. And I dedicated the film to my father, who sadly passed away the day before I started shooting the movie. So his spirit carried me through the making of the film, and the last week of shooting the movie, during the Born to Run concert sequence, I never really have my telephone near me while I'm shooting, but this day I did for good reason, because my wife called to tell me that our house in the Palisades had burned. So I take 5 minutes away from the thousands of people who were in the arena when we recorded that, and into the dark, and I thought, gosh, you know, this is going to be a tough day. How do I get through this? And I thought, well, you know, that's where my father kind of continued to carry me through, and we got to finish the movie, and thankfully here I am in Santa Barbara.
Glad you're here. I see a through line in your films of this neglected souls that are seeking redemption, and they achieve it by perseverance, by soldiering on. And all of your films, Crazy Heart, this film.
Yeah, and even Hostiles. It's interesting, yeah, because I suppose that's really the kind of what I'm drawn to, the indomitable human spirit. Whether it's Bad Blake, that was Jeff Bridges' character, or it's Christian Bale in a few of the movies that we've made together, it's always about ordinary people who are up against extraordinary circumstances, as we all are every day in life. And how do we process that, and how do we push through? And I'm always drawn to, I guess, the people who live in the quiet corners of America. Who live on the margins of society, who are often overlooked, that films aren't the subjects of films generally.
Yeah.
I'm drawn to those people. I grew up around those people. And there's a lot of hardship in America. And people who struggle every day just to get through life, whether you're struggling with depression, whether you're struggling economically, socially. And I'm just drawn to those people. Yeah. But it goes back to the indomitable human spirit that kind of carries me through.
We're used to seeing in films that they triumph through victory by success. In your films, and in this one, is through perseverance.
Yeah, and the art of creation. You know, Bruce said to me, he said, Scott, this was my personal lowest. And I added, but your creative best. I mean, here he writes an album that's considered one of the best in the last 50 years. Nebraska, while simultaneously writing songs that are anthemic, that would be on Born in the USA. So he was able to write these incredibly personal songs and and wrestling with how honest he could be in his work, while at the same time writing about America, indicting America, all the sort of things that Bruce has done since the early 80s. It shows you the breadth of his artistic palette.
Yeah. Why do you think that in his autobiography, the Nebraska chapter, he is lengthy about everything, but when it comes to Nebraska, it's like, if I recall correctly, it was like a page.
Page or page and a half, yeah. And I asked him that when I first met him, and he said it was because it was too painful. He said that could be its own book. As it turns out, Warren Zanes wrote that book, Deliver Me From Nowhere. And that book was sent to me. And Warren and I traveled to New Jersey and met with Bruce. And I asked him that question. And he said, you know, Scott, because it was the hardest chapter, most painful chapter of my life. I didn't realize that I was suffering depression until I was clinically diagnosed. He said, I just had seen my father suffer and lots of men, and it was just what we did. We suffered silently. And there was a stigma around mental health and a stigma around getting help. And he said, it was the only way that I knew how to continue to live was to write. Because as you see in the film, there are a couple of moments that Bruce is suffering suicide ideation. And first time he'd ever really discussed that with me, and he said, I think it's important that that's in the film, because it goes to show that even people who are as outwardly successful as Bruce Springsteen suffer just like all of us, and mental health crises touches everybody. People very close to me. Obviously, Bruce has been dealing with it since 1982, and that's why his chapter was only a page and a half. But I will add that people have been asking Bruce to make a version of his film since 1986, and the version that everybody comes to him with is the Born in the USA story or the Born to Run story, and Bruce did not want that story told. He said, because I think, really, I want people to understand who I am, what my process is, not me at my best, but me at my lowest. Yeah. And of course, somehow we aligned on this.
But this struggle that he undergoes in the film is an internal struggle. Yeah. This is not cinematic.
No.
You know, tell us about
that was the challenge, quite honestly. Is how do you make something, and I'm not quite sure how successfully I did this, but how do you make what's unknown known? How do you make the creative process cinematic? Because films are movement and rhythm and conflict, propulsion. You know, it's not really about making a film about a man who is wrestling with how honest he can be in his work in his bedroom. So it was about how do I open the aperture, which is to show his relationship with his manager, John Landau, who's still his manager. It's to show his relationship with Faye, which was a composite of a couple of women in his life at the time, but it shows that Bruce had a very difficult time connecting to a partner until he really understood himself, what he was going through. It also shows a man who is taking great creative risks while letting his manager balance the commercial implications of that, which is something as a filmmaker we do every time. I mean, I suppose I would have made it a lot easier for the studio if I had made the Born in the USA version or the Born to Run version, but that film never would have been made. And this is the only Bruce Springsteen movie I think we're going to get.
Yeah. You're awfully modest, and my job is to actually pull you away from that and actually talk about the great things that you did in this movie. And one of them is the visuals. You're working once again with Masanobu Takayanagi. And I was
it's our fifth movie together.
Your fifth movie, and I was just blown away how the internal psyche is shown to us visually. You know, tell us about working with him, and in that particular aspect, you know, I noticed the handheld camera, which tells us about his lack of equilibrium.
Yeah, that's right.
And so on.
Well, so when my guiding principle in making the film was to make the film like Bruce made Nebraska, which is to say minimalist and spare.
Stark. Yeah.
Stark, no spectacle. The camera doesn't flinch. It's not a film about the jukebox hits. So much like Bruce records Nebraska on a 4-track recorder, Masa and I discussed recording the film, the camera as though it's a 4-track recorder. And in discussing Bruce, how he remembered his father and his childhood, he said, Scott, I only ever remember my dad, and this time in black and white. And he would send me photos of him at 7 and 8 years old during this time. The cover of Nebraska is black and white for that reason. Mm-hmm. All of the interior images in the liner notes are black and white for that reason. So I said to Masa, let's shoot the film in the flashbacks in a very formalist, never come off the dolly, to make it feel like Bruce's memory, but also to shoot with anamorphic lenses, mm-hmm. which would make it feel like the past. And then when we were to shoot in the current day, 1982, we used the same lenses, the Nikon lenses that photographers would often shoot Bruce in the late 70s and early 80s. And then we would shoot it, to your point, handheld. So it's the opposite, to contrast his memories to shooting it handheld, so you feel a little bit of movement. So because Bruce is in disequilibrium, to show that he's not well. And then it also allowed us to really access his interior state a little more closely. Mm-hmm. And I shot that spherically, and the lenses and the lens sizes allowed us to really, I hope, tell me, to access
correct.
Bruce's interior state.
And tell us about any influence that Terrence Malick's Badlands, which you show in the film, clips from the movie with the Gracies is Basic.
Yes. And Martin Sheen.
And
yep.
Martin Sheen. And then you also shows us clips from Night of the Hunter. And that is in black and white, and the Terrence Malick has this dreamy yes. quality to it, which I saw permeating throughout your film.
Yeah. Well, I had to ask Terry for the footage, and he said, Scott, he's been like a few directors of an older generation, has really embraced me and my work, and he said, Scott, I'll absolutely give you that footage, even though Warner Brothers owns it. He said, but as long as you don't use the scenes where I'm acting in the movie. Because he said, I'm so bad. He's not really that bad. So his work, certainly in Badlands, Days of Heaven, has really influenced my films. Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate also. This particular film, I looked at the work of Wong Kar-wai, Chungking Express, and Martin Scorsese's After Hours to get the feel of 1980s. But really, all directors, because I didn't go to film school, I watch a lot of movies silently, a lot of the classics, and I watch them over and over without sound so that I can see how these masters are moving the camera, more importantly, how they don't move the camera, what lenses they're using, how they're telling the story visually. And I do that with a lot of international cinema as well. So all that kind of, as Jeff Bridges would say, goes into the soup, and we mix it up, and out comes, this.
And then Night of the Hunter. The black and white sequences become the emotional spine of the film, and obviously, go ahead.
So much like you see in the film, Badlands, Night of the Hunter, and Flannery O'Connor were really influencing Bruce during this time. His father, when he was young, as you see, took Bruce out of school, and the film he takes him to is Night of the Hunter, which is quite a terrifying movie. Yeah. And Bruce said, for me, that was always kind of mirroring my anxiety. Ever since I was 8, he said, and every time I see it, he said, I love the film, but I can just feel like my body clenching up. And that was another reason why we also shot in black and white, because that's a film, and and Badlands that that Bruce watches annually. And interestingly, I have to tell this story. So about, I guess it was about a week ago, an unknown caller comes up. It's either my mother-in-law or, I don't know, somebody else. I don't normally pick those up. So I didn't pick it up. As it turns out, it's Emilio Estevez, whom I don't know. And he says, Scott, I've just come out of the movie, and I have somebody here who wants to say hello. And he hands the phone to Martin Sheet. And if I actually were a little more courageous, I would play it for you, but he would kill me. But it was amazing. He said, Scott, finally I'm in one of your movies. And he loved the film, and it like made me feel so great.
Tell us about the driving sequence where
Yes.
you actually do some poetic flair.
Yes.
With the suicide, the
Yeah.
Frankie Teardrop.
Frankie Teardrop. Frankie Teardrop by the avant-garde band Suicide is one of Bruce's all-time favorite records and albums, which we played during that driving sequence. And that and the phone call at the end of the movie when he calls John Landau from Los Angeles, where Bruce was at his lowest, staring into the abyss, feeling, as he says, suicidal. And he's driving down a country road in Colts Neck, New Jersey. I think it was 94 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And he said, even though I didn't have that song on the radio, that's what was playing in my head. And then we take him into his house when he's actually playing it as an album, a post-lap. And it's a very visceral song. Mm-hmm. It's a song that Bruce still listens to that really directly influences Nebraska, The Howling, which you hear in State Trooper and a couple of other songs. Yeah. And it really reflects Bruce at his lowest, but also that and therapy, he said, saved his life. Mm-hmm. He said, that's why I didn't turn the car into a tree, but stepped on the brake and slid. He said, mm-hmm. because I knew that song filled me with so much life and that I have so much more yet to give. Yeah. And clearly, he does.
What I'm about to tell you, just know that I adore you. But your movies have not been known for being funny or putting light touches in it. And I was noticing the character of Paul
Walter Hauser.
Yeah. All of a sudden it's like, oh my God, he's adding comedic.
Well, as the great Robert Duvall, who's a mentor of mine, would say, your films lack humor.
Oh, see,
yes.
So I'm not the only one.
No, you're not.
I'm in good company.
No, right. So I cast Paul for a reason, and here Bruce is near suicidal. He's on the floor listening to Suicide, and Paul Walter Hauser comes in and he says, somebody commit a murder in here? And then later he says, it's kind of hard to dance to, which you can't dance to that song. So look, it's funny because Duvall and, Jeff Bridges, who quite honestly changed my life by saying yes to making my first film, Crazy Heart, that I wrote for Jeff.
And he won the Oscar for?
Yes, he sure did. Yes, deservedly so. Jeff said to me when we were making that film, he said many things that have stayed with me since that experience, quite frankly. But he said, Scott, there is, when things are at their darkest, things can also be at their lightest. And that's what helps us get through, man. And I said, yes, Jeff, you're right. So I have remembered that, and that's why it's in the film.
Okay.
Yes. A comedy's next.
I love the fact that in your film there's such a powerful love story between two men, between John Landau and Bruce. Tell us about writing that as the heart of your film.
Yeah, it's not something you often see, a love story that's the central relationship. But Bruce and John have an unrivaled friendship in all of rock music. When John was a rock critic, he was the first rock critic for Rolling Stone, and then became a movie critic. He very famously said, I've seen the future of rock and roll, and his name is Bruce Springsteen. And that changed the trajectory of both of their lives. And now that I've toured with Bruce, 50 years later, he is the first person before Bruce goes on stage. When they stand together and they put their foreheads together, he's the first person Bruce greets when he comes off stage. And this is a relationship that has endured. Obviously, we see that John has saved Bruce's life by getting him into therapy. But he was much more than a manager, or is much more than a manager. As you see, he's a confidant. He's part father figure, because Bruce didn't have that. He's part therapist when Bruce needed it. And I think we would all be better off if we had someone like John Landau in our life, because now that I've been with him constantly for 2 years, you wouldn't have Bruce Springsteen without John. You wouldn't have this rich body of work. And you also, which everybody who's a creator knows, whether it's a manager or an agent, you need someone who is going to, at all costs, protect your creative intuition and instincts. Mm-hmm. And that's what he did. Because Nebraska is Bruce's worst selling album. But as he thinks, and I agree, it's his best. It's his most personal, it's his most enduring. And you need someone like John Landau who will sit across from an executive, Al Teller, and say, mm-hmm. in this office, in my office, we believe in Bruce Springsteen. No. And everybody needs that in their life, whether you're a musician or not.
And tell us, And tell us about working with the great Jeremy Strong. I mean, I've seen all of his performances. I know him, and when he gets lost in those characters, and the amount of detail that he puts in, not just.
Oh boy, I saw that. He's really wonderful in a film that I directed. And he's amazing in it. But the sequence didn't ultimately work for the film, called Black Mass, starring Johnny mm-hmm. Depp, about the mm-hmm. gangster Whitey Bulger. And Jeremy, I worked with him there. He's a longtime pal. He is a consummate actor who is always searching. He does such very rich interior, detailed work. Obviously, as an exterior, whether he's playing Roy Cohn, mm-hmm. Trump's fixer, or here, where people who've now seen the film said, Scott, you have no idea how close Jeremy Strong is to John Landau at getting that type of performance. But he's an actor who normally we see, whether it's in Succession as Kendall Roy or Roy Cohn, that his successful parts have been kind of cold and calculating and almost venal, those mm-hmm. two characters. But I know Jeremy well, and I knew that he would give a warm and compassionate and fiercely protective and deeply intellectual performance to mm-hmm. counter Bruce's. And I think he's just splendid in the film. He would go so far as to, when he first met John, he would follow behind him a few paces when they were walking so that he could essentially take on his gait, his speech pattern. He would ask, the amount of research that our researcher that he does is so lengthy. No stone is left unturned. And it's interesting because when you direct the kind of actors that I have, whether it's Jeremy Strong or Jeremy White, Robert Duvall, Jeff, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Christian Bale, Johnny Depp, they all have a different process. And you have to understand, first of all, I adore actors, and I have the most fun when I'm shooting. Most of my friends who are directors don't really love to shoot because of the pressure and having to deal with actors, quite frankly. But I love it. No, that's the truth. But I really, really love it. And you learn so much from them. And you learn that you really want to make them feel safe and protected and take big risks. Otherwise, they'll clinch up, mm-hmm. and you won't get the best version of them. And Jeremy work very differently. And you have to understand sometimes about, okay, when you might shoot a close-up or when you might pull back wider, because an actor prefers not to rehearse, or an actor prefers shooting his close-up first, as opposed to normally we would shoot a wide, mm-hmm. right, and help me understand where I'm going to place the camera as I get closer and closer to the close-up. Sometimes actors like Jeremy Strong would prefer shooting his close-up first, which is the reverse of what one normally does. And you have to have another actor who's okay with that, who's ready and willing to do that. So it takes as Martin Sheen says in Badlands, it takes all kinds.
My personal favorite moment in the movie is when Jeremy Strong comes in and plays the record for him, and then they're laying down, and their physical contact. Is that something that you had scripted, or
no?
Just
in fact, I had scripted a very similar scene emotionally, but different blocking, and had nothing to do with the Sam Cooke. So, as so often would happen, Jeremy Strong would come to me with an idea, and he came to me that day and he said, "Listen, I want to try something. Are you up for that?" And I said, "Of course, I'm always up for it." And he went to Jeremy White, and said, "Jeremy, I'm going to try something. Are you up for it?" "Of course." So he had the sound team prepare Sam Cooke's "The Last Mile of the Way." And we played the scene as scripted, beautiful. Then we tried Jeremy's, which is in the film, where he just says, "I'm going to play something for you." And he plays a song that the night before he said to Bruce Springsteen, he said, "Bruce, if you were going to play a song for someone to save their life, what would it be?" And Bruce and I kept texting. Bruce and I and John were texting all these ideas. And Bruce said, "I think it would be my favorite song, Sam Cooke's "The Last Mile of the Way." And that's what you see in the movie. Yeah. So you got to be open to your actors' ideas.
Yeah. Jeremy Allen White, tell us about the fact that you guys were not interested in mimicry, in recreating Bruce Springsteen externally. It's all internal. It's about capturing the essence of Bruce Springsteen.
Yes. When I first asked him, anytime you're asked to play Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan or, I imagine, Elvis, automatically so many people have ownership of who they are, what they should look like, how they should sound. I said, "Jeremy, let's remove all of that. We aren't going for mimicry. We aren't going for imitation. I want you to capture the emotional truth of Bruce, even though in a lot of images from 1982, you bear a very strong physical resemblance to Bruce from the Nebraska era. I really want you not to be bound by that. We're capturing his essence." And I knew that he could play introspection well. I knew that he could convey Bruce's psychological state. I knew that he had Bruce's humility, because that's who Jeremy is. I also knew that he has something that you don't learn at Juilliard, which is swagger. I knew he had that. Now, what I didn't know was how well he could sing. And it wasn't until we started really rehearsing Nebraska in Nashville at the RCA studios, legendary studios, with a vocal coach, guitar coach. We used Willie Nelson's harmonica coach as a teacher, movement coach for Jeremy. And then I just saw him come alive. And I thought, because at first I thought maybe we'll just do what other films have done, which is have the actor lip sync. Obviously, we didn't do that in Crazy Art. Jeff sang everything because Jeff was playing a fictitious character. But Jeremy's playing a character that everybody knows and hears all the time. And I got to be honest, I think he did a great job.
And tell me about the 1953 Gibson G200.
Yes. Well, Bruce has a habit of sending people guitars. When our house burned, as I mentioned, and my daughter Stella, who was born at Cottage, when her guitar burned, what does Bruce do? He sent her one of his. And before we started this, he didn't send Jeremy the exact Gibson J200 that he recorded Nebraska on. He still has that, but he sent him one that is essentially the same guitar, which is what you see in the movie. And that's what Jeremy learned to play on. And as opposed to, as so often we'll go to Gibson or someone and have them send us guitars, Bruce found one that was the exact same model. And that's what you see in the movie.
And tell us about getting the buy-in from Bruce.
Well, I thought it was going to be harder because he had said no to every movie since 1986. But he's a cinephile. He sees a lot of films. He'd seen all of my films, some of them numerous times. And when I went to New Jersey the first time, we didn't talk about Nebraska for the first maybe hour, 2 hours. We talked about my movies, his movies. We talked about as you might expect with Bruce, politics. We talked about just New Jersey. We talked about that time. Then we got around to talking about the making of the film. And he said, why do you want to tell this story? And I said, because many people who are very dear to me, or a few at least, have battled mental health crisis. The album has a great deal of personal resonance for me. I want to show that if Bruce Springsteen can struggle and get the right help and get through this, that so can many others. I said, but most importantly, I want people to forget 5 or 10, 15 minutes into the film that you're even watching a movie about Bruce Springsteen. It just happens to be a guy who is Bruce Springsteen. I said, so I hope people will come into the film thinking it's about Bruce Springsteen, and when they leave, realizing it's about them. And I will say, since I saw you in Telluride, where the movie made its debut, and it's such a lovely festival because you really interact with all of the festival goers, that countless people that weekend came up to me and would say, Scott, my father never told me he loved me. My father never told me he was proud of me. My brother suffers from mental illness, and I hope he sees this and gets the right help. All the time, and that's happened at the New York Film Festival, it's happened in London, most everywhere I go, and sadly, it's much more relatable than I ever thought. So hopefully people will see that and realize they can get the right help, but also maybe they'll go home, sit in the dark, listen to Nebraska, really listen to it, and see themselves in the movie.
Last question. I love how you ended the film. You know, you bring him back to Atlantic City, and he walks away from the camera, gives us our back, and
yeah, it's about a man walking forward. We've seen him struggle. We've seen him at his lowest. We all know that Bruce Springsteen is still incredibly culturally relevant. He's still playing all over the world in front of 100,000 people a night. So about an hour into the film, you see a despairing Bruce Springsteen out front of the actual power station where he recorded so many of his albums, and he says to John Landau, he says, John, I can't, you hear what we're doing in there? It's making me nauseous. You hear what Atlantic City? We can't even get that right. Well, the last song we hear is Atlantic City, and they got it. And that's actually Bruce Springsteen singing it in 2000 at Madison Square Garden, and it shows that through perseverance, right, the indomitable human spirit, that keep moving, keep walking, you'll get there.
Well, I love you, and I love having you here.
It feels so good to be in this room. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.